I still remember that morning, the gray November sky, the faint smell of rain, and the sound of dry leaves brushing across the porch. It was Thanksgiving Day. I had spent the whole week preparing. My hands ached from peeling sweet potatoes, my back hurt from polishing the silverware that had belonged to my mother. I wanted everything to be perfect. Because this year, I told myself, my children would come home. The turkey was already in the oven. I could hear the slow rhythm of it roasting, a soft hiss, a promise of warmth. The table was set for 6, though only 5 plates had names. Mine didn't need one. At around 11, I checked my phone again. Nothing. Then, finally, a message appeared from my daughter, Lisa. "Mom, I'm so sorry. We're not coming this year. Tom's parents invited us, and it's just easier. You understand, right?" I read the message twice. The words blurred for a moment. I typed a reply, "Of course, dear. Have a wonderful time." Then I set the phone down carefully, as if any sudden movement might break what little strength I had left. My son Michael hadn't called in months. I knew he was busy. He always said that, "I'm busy, Mom." Busy building a life that didn't seem to have space for me anymore. By noon, the house smelled of cinnamon and butter and something else, loneliness, maybe. The kind that settles deep in your chest, where memories used to live. The radio played an old jazz song I used to dance to with my late husband, John. I turned it off halfway. The silence felt heavier but somehow more honest. I looked at the table again. The white candles stood tall and proud, like soldiers unaware the war was over. I laughed softly, though it sounded like a sigh. "Well," I said out loud, "it's just you and me again, Martha." That's my name, Martha Evans. 71 years old. Widow. Mother of 2. Invisible to the world, it seems. I poured myself a small glass of wine and tried to be thankful. Thankful for the roof above my head, the warmth of the oven, the memories that hadn't faded yet. But as the hours passed, the gratitude slipped through my fingers like sand. At one point, I thought I heard a car pulling up the driveway. My heart leapt. I hurried to the window. It was just the mail truck. The driver waved politely, not knowing he'd just broken an old woman's heart a little more. Around 3 o'clock, I finally sat down at the table. The turkey gleamed beautifully, golden and perfect. I sliced a small piece, whispering a quiet grace. "Thank you, Lord, for this meal. And for the love that still exists, somewhere." But when I raised my fork, I couldn't eat. The food tasted like memories, rich and heavy and filled with ghosts. In the silence, I imagined their voices. Lisa's laugh, Michael's deep chuckle, John's warm hand resting on mine. For a moment, it was all here again. Then the clock ticked, and the spell broke. I sat there until the light outside faded to blue. The house grew colder. I didn't bother turning on the lamps. At some point, I must have fallen asleep at the table, because when I woke up, the candles had burned low, their wax dripping like tears onto the tablecloth. I whispered to myself, "So this is what it feels like, to be left behind." Then I looked around the room, the pictures, the half-eaten pie, the empty chairs, and smiled sadly. I suppose it's my turn to get used to it. If you've ever spent a holiday alone, you'll understand what I mean, that strange mix of peace and ache. It's not anger. It's not even sadness. It's just quiet. And sometimes, that quiet feels louder than any laughter. What about you? Have you ever felt invisible to the people you love? Tell me in the comments, I'd love to hear your story too. And if this moment speaks to your heart, please like this video and stay with me, there's more I want to share. Because that night, something happened I will never forget. The next morning, the house was still. The smell of roasted turkey lingered in the air, mixed with the faint sweetness of apple pie. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen blinds in thin, fragile lines, dust dancing in them like memories that refused to leave. I made myself a cup of coffee. Black. No sugar. That's how John liked it, said it kept him honest. I smiled at the thought, even though my eyes stung. When you live alone long enough, your house becomes an echo chamber. Every sound feels heavier. The creak of the floorboards, the soft hum of the refrigerator, they all start to sound like whispers from another life. As I sat by the window, looking out at the empty yard, I saw the swing that used to hold 2 children. Lisa and Michael. They were small then, always laughing, always calling, "Push me higher, Mom." Now, the ropes had turned gray, the wood faded. That morning, something inside me finally cracked, but not in a bad way. It was like a frozen river thawing, painfully, slowly, but with purpose. For months, maybe years, I had lived like a ghost in my own life, waiting for calls, for visits, for a sense of belonging that never came. But that day, I realized something simple: no one was coming to rescue me from this silence. If I wanted to feel alive again, I had to open my own door. So I started small. I cleaned the table, carefully wrapping the leftover turkey in foil, dividing it into small containers. Then I packed a basket, turkey, pie, and a few homemade rolls. I didn't know exactly who it was for yet. I just knew it wasn't meant to stay in that empty house. Outside, the air was cold and sharp. I pulled my old wool coat tighter around me. The one John bought me 20 years ago. It still smelled faintly of cedar and winter. As I stepped onto the porch, I noticed the mailbox was stuffed. I hadn't checked it in days. Among the bills and catalogs, there was a small handwritten envelope. The handwriting was shaky, familiar. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down. She was 90, nearly blind, and always alone. The note said, "Dear Martha, I hope you're doing all right. I made too much soup yesterday. If you'd like some, please stop by. I'd love the company." I stood there for a moment, clutching the letter, realizing how blind I'd been to the small kindnesses around me. I wasn't the only one lonely on Thanksgiving. So I walked over. Slowly, carefully, my basket in hand. When she opened the door, her eyes lit up. "Martha." I was just praying someone would come. Inside her little house, everything smelled of lavender and old paper. We sat together, sipping tea and sharing the meal I'd prepared. We talked for hours, about our children, about the husbands we'd lost, about how the world had grown too fast for us to keep up. When I left, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for remembering me." I smiled and said, "You remembered me first." That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept deeply. The days after that felt different. Something in me had shifted, gently, but permanently. I started waking up earlier, watering the small plants by the kitchen window, even baking again. I called a few old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Some didn't answer. Some did. One of them, Helen, invited me to join a knitting group that met on Thursdays at the community center. I hesitated at first. It had been so long since I'd been around people. But the next Thursday, I went. I wore my softest scarf and a bit of lipstick, a small act of rebellion against invisibility. The community hall smelled of coffee and yarn. Laughter echoed from every corner. Women my age, some older, some younger, sat in a circle, chatting, knitting, living. Helen waved me over. "There she is. I told them you'd come." I smiled nervously and took a seat. At first, I barely spoke. I just listened, stories about grandchildren, about aging hips, about husbands who still snored. Then, somehow, I started to laugh. It felt strange, like remembering how to breathe. When I got home that night, I stood before the mirror. My hair had turned silver, my hands were wrinkled, but my eyes looked alive again. For years, I had waited for someone to make me feel seen. Now, I realized, maybe I just needed to see myself first. A week passed. Then another. Thanksgiving leftovers were long gone, but I'd found something new to savor, small moments of connection. One afternoon, while tidying up, I came across an old box of John's things. Letters, photographs, his watch. I opened one of the letters. It was from him, written years before he died. Martha, if you're reading this someday when I'm gone, promise me one thing, don't disappear. Keep loving, keep giving. That's who you are. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, I'm trying, John. I really am. That evening, just as the sun began to set, I heard it, a knock on the door. Firm, unexpected. My heart raced. For a moment, I thought maybe Lisa had changed her mind, maybe Michael finally remembered his mother. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to open it. But it wasn't them. It was a man, tall, with gray hair and kind eyes. He looked to be in his 70s, wearing a worn denim jacket. He smiled gently. I'm sorry to bother you, ma'am. My car broke down just up the road. I was wondering if I could use your phone. Something in his voice, polite, tired, genuine, reminded me of John. Of course, I said. Come in, it's cold out there. He stepped inside, rubbing his hands for warmth. I handed him the old cordless phone from the counter. He thanked me, made a brief call to a towing service, and then glanced at the pie cooling on the stove. That smells incredible, he said with a laugh. Pumpkin? Yes, I replied, smiling. And too much nutmeg, probably. We both chuckled. For a few minutes, we talked, about the weather, about Thanksgiving, about how the town had changed. His name was Edward, a retired teacher passing through to visit his daughter. When his tow truck finally arrived, he thanked me again. But before leaving, he paused at the door. You know, he said softly, I was supposed to spend Thanksgiving with my daughter. She canceled last minute. Seems we both got stood up, huh? I laughed, a real laugh this time. Seems so. He looked at me thoughtfully. Well, if you ever need company, maybe next Thanksgiving, I'd love to return the kindness. After he left, I stood at the door, the cold air brushing my face. The loneliness was still there, but it had changed shape, softer, lighter, like a shadow that no longer frightened me. That night, as I sat by the fire with a cup of tea, I thought about all that had happened since that lonely Thanksgiving morning. No one had saved me. There was no grand miracle, no sudden apology for my children. But there had been something else, something quieter, truer. A letter from a neighbor. A room full of laughter. A stranger's knock. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have at 71. But maybe it was the life I needed, one that reminded me that even in solitude, kindness can find you, if you leave the door unlocked. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt forgotten, don't give up. Sometimes healing begins in the smallest moments. Tell me, what helped you find peace after being hurt by someone you love? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonates with you, please like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes, the quietest hearts have the loudest stories. The following morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming across the kitchen table. The sky was bright, almost too bright for late November. The world outside seemed alive again, as if it, too, had decided to move on. For a long time, I sat there just listening, the hum of the heater, the chirp of a bird outside, the sound of my own breathing. Everything felt quieter inside me. Not the hollow kind of quiet, but the peaceful kind. I thought about Edward, the man with the broken-down car and kind eyes. I wondered if he'd made it safely to his daughter's house. Part of me wanted to believe that our short meeting wasn't just coincidence. Maybe life had sent us both exactly what we needed, a reminder that we weren't invisible after all. Later that day, I decided to walk to the park. It had been years since I'd gone that far alone. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but it felt good, clean, honest. The trees were mostly bare now, their branches black against the pale sky. A few children were playing near the swings, their laughter echoing across the empty field. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes. For a moment, I let the memories wash over me, John's voice, the laughter of my children when they were small, the sound of Thanksgiving dinners long gone. But instead of sadness, I felt gratitude. Gratitude that I had loved deeply enough to miss it this much. When I returned home, I found a small envelope on my doorstep. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message inside was simple. Thank you for your kindness. Made it to my daughter's safely. She and I talked more than we have in years. I think your warmth reminded me what really matters. I hope this isn't the last time we meet. Edward. I held the letter to my chest and smiled. It had been a long time since anyone had written me something just because they cared. That night, I lit a candle at the dinner table again. Only one this time. Not for company I wished for, but for the peace I had found. I poured myself a small glass of wine and whispered, to love, in all its forms, even the ones that stay silent. And as I sipped, I realized something that had taken me 71 years to understand. Sometimes, life doesn't give us what we expect. But it always gives us opportunities to begin again, quietly, bravely, gently. A week later, I went to the community center again. Helen was there, smiling, waving me over to the knitting circle. Guess what, she said. We're organizing a Christmas dinner for anyone spending the holidays alone. Would you help? I laughed softly. I think I know a few people who'd love that. And so we did. We cooked together, set up tables, and invited the forgotten ones, widows, retirees, lonely neighbors who had stopped expecting invitations. The room was full of laughter, of stories, of old hands passing plates to strangers who soon felt like friends. For the first time in years, the warmth I had been trying to build inside my little house spilled outward, into something bigger. As the evening ended, I looked around the room. Faces glowing in candlelight. Hands clasping in gratitude. No one was alone. Helen squeezed my hand. You look happy, Martha. I smiled. I am. For the first time in a long while, I truly am. That night, when I returned home, I placed Edward's letter beside John's old note in the box of keepsakes. 2 reminders, one from the past, one from the present, both whispering the same truth. Love never really leaves. It just changes shape. Outside, snow began to fall, thin flakes drifting gently through the dark. I opened the window a little and let the cold air in. It smelled like pine and quiet and something hopeful. I thought about my children then. Lisa, busy with her family. Michael, lost in his own world. For the first time, I didn't feel angry or hurt. I simply wished them peace, and silently hoped that one day, they'd remember where home was. And even if they didn't, that was all right. Because home wasn't the walls or the dinner table anymore. Home was wherever my heart decided to open. As I blew out the candle, the flame flickered once and went out. But the room didn't feel dark. The fire from within, small but steady, kept glowing. I whispered softly to the quiet room, "Thank you, John. Thank you, Edward. Thank you, life, for reminding me that I'm still here." And maybe that's what dignity really means. To stand alone, not in bitterness, but in peace. To still choose kindness, even when no one's watching. To find light in your own company. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, real-life stories about love, family, and healing, subscribe to Lydia's True Stories and turn on the bell. I post new heartfelt moments every week.